My husband's grandmother called me into the room and showed me what I had never seen before. Hello, my loves from Meat Lover. My name is Hannah. I'm 34 years old, an ordinary woman, but sometimes I feel like my life is one of those stories you read in cheap romance and tragedy books. I live in Asheville, a cozy town in the heart of North Carolina, surrounded by majestic mountains that seem to embrace you on good days and suffocate you on bad. Here, the seasons are well defined. Summer is vibrant, full of tourists, while winter brings a chill that makes the wood of the houses creak at night. For outsiders, Asheville is a place that inspires tranquility, but for those who live here, the secrets and dramas of everyday life have the same intensity as any large metropolis. I'm married to Thomas, a man of 38, the kind of man anyone would describe as good. He's practical, responsible, and even though he's not a romantic man, he makes a point of maintaining security and stability in our lives. He runs a hardware store in the historic part of town, Carpenters and Company, a business that has been in the family for generations. Thomas grew up in Asheville and knows every alley and street corner. I've always been impressed by how he greets everyone on the street by name, a reflection of the relationship he has with the community. And as charming as that sounds, sometimes it bothers me. Being married to him has made me feel like my life is also stuck in this city, in these mountains, with no room for anything new. I, on the other hand, run a small cafe in the center called Morning Bloom. It's a cozy space with simple but charming decor, wooden shelves, flowered curtains, and tables that almost always smell of fresh bread. There's something therapeutic about running a place like this, organizing orders, listening to customers tell their stories. But sometimes as I pour an espresso or wipe down the marble tables, I find myself looking out the window, imagining a life beyond Asheville, beyond coffee, beyond Thomas. It was in this context that Abigail, Thomas's grandmother, became part of my daily life. She's 72, but she's the kind of woman who redefines what it means to grow old. Abigail is a force of nature. Despite her age, she still walks upright, has sparkling eyes, and an energy that borders on contagious. Her presence fills any room, whether with her vibrant laugh or with stories of her youth spent in New Orleans. For her, life has been a stage and every moment a performance. Abigail lives alone in a Victorian house that is practically a landmark in Asheville. When I first entered the house, shortly after marrying Thomas, I was enchanted by the place. It was as if every corner held a secret. Abigail welcomed me with a warm smile, and we got on well ever since. Over the years, we became close. Thomas often joked that I got on better with his grandmother than with him. Perhaps there was some truth in that. I admired Abigail in a way I couldn't explain. She was unlike anyone I knew, including Thomas. There was something about her, her vivacity, her passion for small things, her way of looking at me as if she saw something that I didn't even know was there. I remember one Sunday in particular about 6 months ago. We were all at her house for the traditional family lunch. The kitchen was an organized chaos with steaming pans and the smell of freshly baked bread permeating the room. Abigail seemed to be in her element, mastering everything with dexterity. At one point, she asked me to help her carry a platter to the table. Our fingers touched as she handed me the plate. It was a brief touch, but something about it made me hold my breath. I laughed to myself, attributing that sensation to a moment of distraction. These little moments accumulated like pieces of a puzzle that I still didn't know how to put together. What I did know, however, was that my relationship with Abigail was changing. She wasn't just Thomas's grandmother or just an older friend. There was something about her that moved me in a way that no one else could, something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt for years. The night it all began, the city seemed shrouded in a veil of mystery. A storm was approaching, and the heavy clouds cast heavy shadows over the streets of Asheville. I was in the cafe, finishing organizing the till when my phone rang. It was Abigail. Her voice, usually full of energy, sounded a little hesitant. "Hannah, honey, could you come over here? I need help with some boxes in the attic. I'm sorry to ask at the last minute, but Thomas mentioned you were around." There was something in his voice that made me drop everything immediately. I hung up the phone, hurriedly closed my coffee, and drove to his house. The rain began to fall as I climbed the hill that led to the imposing Victorian house. When I arrived, the lights were on, and Abigail's silhouette could be seen through the curtains. Even with the storm in the background, the house looked inviting, a refuge from the chaos outside. She opened the door before I could knock. "You came quickly. Thank you," she said with a smile that seemed warmer than usual. The familiar scent of tea and old wood enveloped me as soon as I entered. "Of course, Abigail. What do you need?" I asked, trying to ignore the slight acceleration of my heart. "It's just a few boxes in the attic. I thought I'd organize them before the next family gathering." She led me through the house to a narrow staircase that led to the attic. With each step, the creaking of the wood seemed to echo louder, mixing with the distant sound of thunder. The attic was a vast space, lit only by a lamp hanging from the ceiling. It was crammed with boxes, old furniture covered in sheets and shelves full of dusty books. The smell of old paper and mold was almost comforting, as if the space held stories long forgotten. We started organizing the boxes in silence, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was as if words were unnecessary. From time to time, our hands would meet as we picked up the same box, and each touch seemed to last a little longer than necessary. I tried to ignore it, but it was impossible not to notice the tension in the air, like the electricity of a storm about to burst. "Hannah," Abigail finally broke the silence, her voice soft but firm. "Do you ever feel like you're living a life you didn't choose?" The question took me by surprise. I put down the box I was holding and turned to her. Her eyes stared at me, full of a sincerity that disarmed me. I don't know," I replied hesitantly. "I think we all feel that way sometimes. But why are you asking me this?" She sighed, running her hand through her impeccably coiffed gray hair. "Because I see something in you, Hannah. Something that perhaps you haven't realized yet. There's a flame inside, but you seem afraid to let it shine." Before I could reply, thunder rumbled and the light from the lamp flickered on. We stayed in the dark for a few seconds until the light came back on, dimmer. Abigail gave a small smile as if that moment had been choreographed by the universe. Without thinking, I took her hand. "I don't know what to say, Abigail, but sometimes I feel like something is missing, like my life is good but not good enough." She squeezed my hand lightly and silence enveloped us again, but this time it wasn't the same silence. It was filled with something I couldn't name. When we'd finished organizing the boxes, Abigail suggested we go downstairs for tea. I accepted, still trying to process the conversation and the way she seemed to see me in a way that no one else did. In the kitchen, the sound of the rain beating against the windows created a soft melody. Abigail was preparing the tea with the skill of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. Her movements were graceful, almost mesmerizing. I sat at the table and watched her, feeling a mixture of calm and anxiety. "Hannah," she said, placing the cup in front of me and sitting down next to me. "Life is too short to live on autopilot. Sometimes we need courage to break the rules and discover who we really are." His eyes met mine, and at that moment, the whole world seemed to stop. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't something trivial. There was an intensity in that look that made my heart soar. "I don't know if I'm brave enough for this," I confessed, my voice almost a whisper. Abigail leaned in slightly, her hand resting on mine. "You are, Hannah. I see it in you." It was a brief moment, but it changed everything. It wasn't just the touch, but what it carried, a promise of something new, something different, a spark that threatened to set fire to everything I knew. After that night, something inside me changed. I tried to ignore it, but every time I saw Abigail, I felt the same tension, the same adrenaline rush. Our meetings became more frequent, but always under the pretext of something banal, a recipe to share, a book to borrow, help in the garden. But with each visit, the connection between us became more evident. The beginning was shy, almost innocent. The first step towards the inevitable happened one fall afternoon. The trees in Asheville were tinged with gold and red, and the air had that fresh smell of dried leaves. Thomas was at work, and I, under the pretext of taking some sweets to Abigail, went to her house. She welcomed me with a warm smile, wearing a navy blue dress that accentuated her sparkling eyes and impeccably groomed gray hair. There was something about that woman that exuded elegance and strength, something that attracted me in a way I couldn't explain. "Come in, dear. It's starting to get cold outside," she said, holding my hand a moment longer than necessary. The house was warm, smelling of herbal tea and fresh bread. She suggested we have tea in the winter garden, a glassed-in room full of plants and flowers that seemed to flourish even as the world outside began to strip away for the winter. The sunlight filtering through the leaves created a play of shadows on the floor, an almost magical scene. We sat at a small round table, and I watched her as she talked about an old book she was reading, her voice like a soft chant. But my mind wandered. I wondered how this woman, with all her life experience and self-confidence, saw me. Did she know the effect she had on me? Or was it all in my head? "You seem distant today, Hannah," she said, interrupting my thoughts. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, I'm fine," I lied, but my gaze betrayed me. She knew. Abigail always knew. Without warning, she leaned forward and took my hand on the table. Her touch was firm but gentle, as if she were asking permission without words. "You can tell me, darling. Anything." I should have backed away. I should have gotten up and left. But at that moment, all I could think about was the warmth of her hand and the way her eyes seemed to see every hidden corner of my soul. "Abigail," my voice came out hesitant, almost inaudible. I don't know what's happening to me." She didn't answer right away, but her fingers lightly squeezed mine. Her eyes, normally full of life and wit, were now serene, almost sad. "Hannah, sometimes what we feel doesn't make sense at first glance, but that doesn't mean it's wrong." His eyes were fixed on mine, and the world around us seemed to stop. Without thinking, I leaned forward, and our faces were so close that I could smell the light scent of lavender on his skin. Then it happened. A kiss, soft and hesitant, but full of an intensity that made me forget to breathe. It was as if everything inside me had been waiting for that moment, and after the kiss, we connected right there. From that day on, our visits became more frequent, but also more cautious. Abigail was discreet, careful. "Nobody needs to know anything," she used to say, and I agreed, although sometimes I wished I could shout my feelings to the world. Our moments together were always surrounded by care and intensity. There was something about the way she held my hand, the way she looked at me, that made the world around us disappear. But the weight of the secret was also beginning to grow. Being in Thomas's presence became increasingly difficult. He noticed my distance, although he never asked directly. Perhaps he preferred to believe that it was just the stress of work or something equally mundane. I knew it was a dangerous road, but I couldn't turn away, because for the first time in years, I felt like I was alive.